Hello and welcome to the Academy Show here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me, Matt Addison, as we get set to, of course, talk all things out of the Academy. Of course, last season was disrupted, the end of it. We'll get into that, tie up some loose ends there. We've also got the Kirkby training ground complex to talk about as well. Changes in the management structure in the under-23s in particular as well as new signings. Who doesn't want to talk about new signings? As I say, Matt's alongside me. Matt, how are we?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Looking forward to a new season and very much looking forward to some academy football as well. Obviously, it's been such a long time since we've been down to Kirkby and been able to do anything like that. So, yeah, it's an exciting time for all the football. Obviously, we think about the Premier League and senior football first and foremost, but even more of a long wait really for the academy side. So it should be good to get into that today.
I'm going to say, it feels like an eternity since we last spoke about the Academy. And quite frankly, it has been. It's been, I think, 6 months all told probably since we last did an Academy show here on Blood Red. Of course, the season was curtailed and stopped in March as the senior football was. And given the Academy football structure and everything that goes with it as well, as I said right at the top, it was filled early. And as I said, I suppose it's even now, it's still a bit unsure with exactly what's going on.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, we don't know exactly when the season's going to begin, or in terms of the fixtures and that sort of thing. We don't quite know how it's going to work. I'm sure there's still little things ongoing. Obviously, it's difficult to have coronavirus testing and you don't want people travelling too far. You think of the UEFA Youth League, which we're going to touch on a little bit later as well. It's certain things like that I think have still got to be ironed out. So at this moment in time, we're not too sure on the exact details. Obviously, last season ended with a few matches left, so it's almost not closed that last chapter before you started the next one really. But I suppose there's not a great deal you can do about that. Obviously, we know the under-18s had, I think, 4 matches left of their league season. The 23s had 2 left. So look, it wasn't the ideal end to what had been a pretty decent season, particularly for the under-18s. But I suppose particularly for the 23s as well, not necessarily in terms of results, but in terms of progressing up until the first team. So it's disappointing end, and I suppose that just makes the appetite, even bigger really to get started and get going again.
Yeah, I suppose that is the end of last season, of course, and then it's all about sort of even gearing up for this season. And as you say, that the uncertainty over the fixtures, but obviously the squads do still need to prepare for the football. And certainly, I suppose, the 23s, because they may even still have a number of players who might end up with this elongated transfer window, still might end up going out on loan, even be it into sort of the middle of October.
Yeah, exactly. It's an important pre-season. The academy players, I think, have been back about 4.5 weeks now, back in training and sort of keeping them or getting themselves fit again, I suppose, after all that time away. But yeah, the 23s have played 3 games. They've played TNS. They've beaten Carlisle 4-1. And they've beaten Derby County as well. And the 18s beat Crewe and Huddersfield 5-0 and also beat Leicester 4-1 as well. So some decent results so far in pre-season. But yeah, as always with these things, it's more about fitness than anything else. I mean, certainly for the 23s to beat Carlisle United, that was their first team, to beat them 4-1 and sort of show that they were at that standard, even if it is only a friendly. It's still, an impressive result, certainly. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they can that form, obviously, into the first few games of the season. But I suppose without knowing exactly when those are going to be, that's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, certainly is the case. Remember when we spoke in, I think it was February when we were doing the Academy show, we were looking forward and looking ahead to what was to come this summer in terms of, I suppose, bringing the club together from first team and academy level with, of course, the first team set to leave Melwood at the time and come over to Kirkby. Of course, all of that's been put back a fair bit. Where are we now with the training ground?
Yeah, I mean, people may well have seen the video that's circulating on social media of what the new training ground looks like and things like that. It's obviously a very impressive setup. It's somewhere that has come on a lot since there was last at the academy, which I think, as you say, was about February time, possibly early March, when we last had an academy show, and I was down at the academy just before that. So it's certainly come on and developed a great deal since then. But obviously the plan was for that to be finished in time for first team pre-season this season, so that they could move across there and the sort of link that is going to take place would have been finished. Obviously, that's not the case. The first team are still training at Melwood. They're back, obviously, now. And it's not a massive issue. It's not a problem, I suppose that's what you'd say. It would have been, in an ideal world, the big summer for the first team to link with the academy, and I suppose it would have been beneficial to get that done as soon as possible. But in reality, it's better to get that right, get the training ground finished properly, not rush and sort of make mistakes or do anything with that. So, yeah, the first team can still use the Melwood training base for another 12 months. They're relaxed. They can move at any point into their new facility. It might be the case that, it's finished in a month or two's time and they decide, actually, we can move now, or they might want to move maybe next summer, just so it's not in the middle of a season. But whichever way it will be it this summer, be it some point during the season or next summer even, at some point we are going to see move take place. And it's really exciting for all of the academy players to be able to go in and train on the same pitches, the same facility as the first team. As we've discussed plenty of times, obviously, it's just a little walk between the two setups, and it's going to be hugely beneficial, especially, I think, for those players who are sort of on the edge of the 23s going into the first team. To not have that distance between the two training grounds, I think, can only be a really good thing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I suppose one thing that's just sort of made me think there when you were talking about sort of the timeframes, and this is just pure speculation, but if Kirkby is all finished off in terms of the new first team unit and first team area for their, say, by December, that busy period of time, when Jurgen Klopp's spoken obviously so much about recovery and how he wants his players right and correct and proper. Well, if that facility is up and running by a very busy time of the season for Liverpool, we might see maybe a few players just coming along for recovery sessions down there. We'll have to wait and see how that one does all play out. But that's the training ground. And I suppose with the academy, there's been a fair bit of upheaval. Probably, I suppose, the long extended break from football has given the Reds actually a chance to get all their ducks in a row with the academy, because we've spoken about the way in last season finished. We spoke about the training ground. Now we best talk about who's going to be coaching which age groups, because there's been a fair bit of change around, because obviously Neil Critchley just before lockdown had left to move to Blackpool.
Yeah, big move for Neil Critchley, really important, and obviously we will see him again this afternoon as Liverpool's first team take on Blackpool. So yeah, it's a really sort of interesting proposition. Obviously it means that Barry Lewtas will step up from the under-18s into the under-23s, obviously replacing a manager in Neil Critchley that he knows really well. He's been at the academy, Barry Lewtas, for a long time. He's very highly rated, and someone who I've spoken to plenty of times, probably more times than any other coach at the academy, to be honest. He's always been very good with his time and that sort of thing. So from a journalistic point of view, that's probably not a bad thing. Not that Neil Critchley was any different, to be fair, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he steps up into that position. And it's not obviously just an under-23s role. That's a hugely influential role on its own, but when you think that Neil Critchley took over the first team a couple of times last season, it's an added little bit of incentive really for Barry Lewtas. Not that he would have needed that, I'm sure. So be interesting to see if anything similar happens next season. We know fixture congestion is going to be an issue again, so quite possibly that may well be, but be interesting to see how he gets on, and not least because of the man who's going to be alongside him as well, Gary O'Neil, the former Premier League player for many clubs, Portsmouth included, where he actually worked under Michael Edwards. Michael Edwards was just coming through in the early 2000s as a kind of early sort of analyst or scout. Obviously, he's then moved into a job at Liverpool, and apparently Gary O'Neil has come into the academy setup with very much a sort of a reward really for his coaching journey so far. He retired about 12 months ago, and is a very highly rated coach. He's put in a lot of work. It does take a lot of effort to get yourself into the position that he's done. So it's a big opportunity, but certainly one that Michael Edwards and the rest of Liverpool's recruitment team in that sense were keen to get in. So again, it's a fascinating appointment and will be really interesting. And finally, of course, Barry Lewtas stepping up from the 18s to the 23s means that somebody else would have to take over his under-18 setup. And just when Barry Lewtas moved up from the 16s to the 18s, that's exactly what Marc Bridge-Wilkinson has done. So he's been at the academy for 5 years. He was at Huddersfield before he came to Liverpool, arrived as under-14s manager, worked his way up, replaced Barry Lewtas first as under-16s manager, now the under-18s. So again, both of them very highly rated and have both been promoted. So he is one that I don't know a great deal about. I've never spoken to him, never had a conversation with him, but fingers crossed, once the academy season begins again, we can start going back, start having little interviews and stuff like that again. And hopefully I will get the opportunity to meet him sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and it's encouraging, isn't it? And I suppose it works really well for academy football that you have the managers, in effect, following the teams up through the age group. So, for example, someone like Barry Lewtas, who's worked with now a number of players who'll be in the 23s, will really sort of have already had a key role in their development and hopefully have those strong bonds as well to be able to help those players kick on even further. I have to say, I'm also very excited about the appointment of Gary O'Neil, a young former, obviously, Premier League midfield players, seen a few of them move into management in recent years. Steven Gerrard, no less. So, we will, with great anticipation, see how his coaching journey certainly begins with Liverpool. Let's then talk about new faces in another respect, and that, Matt, is signings. The first team might have been quite quiet, but at the academy, there's plenty of new faces arriving.
Yeah, plenty of activity, obviously. The first one, probably the biggest name, to be honest, I think the one that has seemingly caused most of the excitement, Malkamu Frauendorf from Germany, born in Ethiopia, but he is a German under-16 international. Born in 2004, which makes me feel incredibly old, and I'm only 22. But
I was going to say, makes you feel old. Yeah, no. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's when you see those dates of birth, it does give you a shock sometimes. But yeah, no, an attacking midfielder, 7 goals and 5 assists for the under-17s. He played one match actually as a right back last season, so interesting there. But Liverpool have brought him into their setup this summer. And yeah, he scored on his debut against Huddersfield in one of those friendlies. So yeah, certainly set up a bit of an interesting first season, I would say, for him. I'm sure he'll be with the under-18s, and hopefully he can then make a decent of it. And I suppose that the other big name as well, again, very difficult to pronounce, Mateusz Musialowski from Poland, 16, nearly 17, will go into the under-18s, just the same as Frauendorf, really. Just at that age, ready to go in there with the view to progressing into the future. But yeah, that deal, I believe, has been in the pipeline for a good few months. Now officially done. And apparently last season scored 120 goals in a single season. So from a right-wing position, not a bad record to go with. So those two, I would say, are probably the two biggest signings, the ones that have caused most excitement. But yeah, there is a few others as well. Plenty of goalkeepers to go through.
Yeah, we'll get into them. You mentioned the goals there from the right-hand side, 120 in a single season. I think when Mohamed Salah scored 40 odd a few years back, we were all excited at first team level. So who knows, eh? We might have to watch out, albeit Harvey Elliott doing a fantastic job himself in the academy in that position. As you say then, a few goalkeepers, and Liverpool already quite well stocked for goalkeepers in the academy, and they've certainly been adding to the ranks even further.
Yeah, it was an important position really to strengthen. Danny Atherton, Shamal George and Kai Mackenzie-Lyle all released this summer. So Liverpool basically needed to get some more names through the door, even if it's just to sort of fill a few squad roles and that sort of thing. So yeah, Fabian Mrozek, also Polish, signed a few months back. He's another 16-year-old, basically there to replace one of those 3 goalkeepers that have been moved on. Again, would imagine that he will be with Musialowski in the under-18. So he is certainly one to look out for. And then a couple of others, Marcelo Luga, 17-year-old Fluminense goalkeeper, doesn't actually play for Liverpool yet, but the Echo believes that Liverpool have submitted an offer for him. So yeah, the belief is that he holds a German passport. There's not going to be any work permit issues, as we've seen with the likes of Anderson Arroyo and players like that, the Colombian fullback. So yeah, Arroyo's still actually at the club, incidentally, but is struggling to get a game because of that work permit issue. But yeah, Pitaluga, apparently not the case. And then third and final one, obviously, 19-year-old Javi Sendon, I believe is how you pronounce that. People will have heard of him, of course, obviously. Training with the first team during their Austrian tour and impressing, really, I think, not just in the way that he's performed, but his sort of attitude, his intelligence, that sort of thing, everything, the whole package he seemingly has. So be interesting to see if they keep him around. Again, 19 years of age. So if they do, you'd imagine he will go into the under-23s. So obviously plenty of highly rated, well-regarded goalkeepers at Liverpool already. I suppose you've got to have two of those at the very least per age group. And if one or two of them leave, as has happened this summer, you do have to replace them.
Yeah, and I said before, there's a fair few goalkeepers at Liverpool and in the academy, and even at it's sort of, as you say, you need to have two for each age group, but there is a fair few, and they are well stocked. Just wanted to ask you about a couple of them. You say Harvey Senden there, of course, he was with the first team in Austria, and just thinking the makeup of Jurgen Klopp's first team squad with the goalkeepers, obviously Loris Karius is part of that right now, Adrian, and of course Alisson Becker. Andy Lonergan left at the end of last season, but with Harvey Senden certainly going on that Austrian pre-season tour, are we maybe hitting a low move for Caoimhin Kelleher? Do you think this season, how much would that aid his development? And of course, someone like Kamil Grabara, what's the latest with him? Is he going to be heading back out as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult with young goalkeepers, isn't it? I mean, certainly to start with Kelleher, I mean, it's one of those where I think it's almost a decision that you've got to take. Is it better for him to keep training with the best goalkeeper in the world, and obviously Alisson Becker, to train with Adrian as well? To keep training with those players, I think, is very beneficial. You're coming up against, obviously, Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane in training, things like that. That's hugely, hugely important. So I think it's a decision that's got to be made. At some point, a goalkeeper has got to go out and experience proper football, if you like. But I suppose it is still beneficial for him to stick around. So I would imagine Kelleher will stay around probably until maybe the end of October. Obviously, players can move out on loan, I think 3 weeks after that October the 5th transfer deadline. So I think Liverpool will take a look at what has happened. I think they will be slightly reluctant, given how much of the season Alisson Becker missed last season. If you're then having Adrian as your number one for a sustained period of time again, then Kelleher will be required to be on the bench. But if that's not going to be the case, and I suppose you never really know, do you? It's sort of a gamble that you've got to take. But if that is not going to be the case, and he's not going to get any opportunities even to just be in the squad on a match day, I suppose the only real beneficial thing would be to go out and maybe go into the Championship. So it's a decision for the club to take. We don't know at this stage what that decision will be, but I suspect the player will have as much influence as anybody else on that. If he really pushes and says, I've had enough of being here and not getting a game, I want to go out to the Championship, I'm sure, Liverpool would find some sort of agreement. And I'm also sure that, there'd be a fair few Championship clubs who would be interested in him. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with him. In terms of Kamil Grabara, I'm pretty sure that obviously being out on loan at Huddersfield last season, I would imagine that he will go out again at some point, because there's just too many people, I think, in the pecking order ahead of him. Obviously, Loris Karius still at Liverpool. I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a long-term future, but if Liverpool can find a buyer, maybe he's the third choice, and both of those young goalkeepers would then get the opportunity to go out on loan. So I suppose, like all of these things, the transfer window is fluid. We don't know quite where players are going to be at the end of all this. In a few weeks' time, I think it will become clearer. But certainly Grabara, I can see going on loan, possibly even on a permanent deal. And Caoimhin Kelleher, it wouldn't massively surprise me either. But I think we might be a couple of months away for that.
Yeah, nice way for us to then segue into the next part of the show, and that being what has happened to a few of the faces that were around the academy last season that are no longer there. A few players have already headed out on loan, as we were suggesting there might happen with a couple of the young goalkeepers, and also some heading out permanently. So, we'll have a quick roundup of these, if you don't mind, Matt.
Yeah, a fair few players that people will know. Obviously, Isaac Christie-Davies, we've spoken about him and how unfortunate he was when he went out on loan to Belgium, Cercle Bruges. He was only there about a day or two and then got a big injury. He's now 22, I think, maybe possibly even 23, but it's sort of time for him to leave now, I think, and he has been effectively released, brought in from Chelsea a couple of years ago, but it's time for him to find a new club. So he is one that has gone. Jack Walls as well. He's also been released. As far as I'm aware, hasn't got a club at this stage. but I'm sure at some point in the line somebody will take a chance on him if they haven't already. So certainly a couple of players there that will, they'll have fond memories of being at Liverpool. Obviously, it's a big club. I don't think either of them realistically had a chance of getting into that first team. So it was the right time for them to move on and get some more football elsewhere. In other positions, Pedro Chiravella, of course, still technically an academy player. I suppose you could have called him a first team player, given he is about 23 at this stage, but he's now made a permanent transfer to Nantes, of course. And Adam Lewis as well followed him across to France, Amiens. He's going to be there for the season on loan. Again, obviously, just so many players ahead of him in the pecking order. Last season, we saw obviously Andy Robertson and James Milner would be in the first team at left back ahead of him. Kostas Tsimikas, of course, coming in was almost the decision made for him, really. I think he's 20 now. He's at the age where he's desperate to go and play football. He's too good, really, to play in the under-23s week in, week out. So, yeah, it's an interesting move, and obviously not the biggest club in Ligue over in France, but it's going to be interesting to see how he gets on, because certainly I think he'll, at the very least, be hoping to play for a bigger club in terms of a permanent move next summer. So, yeah, certainly a lot of interest in those players. Harvey Kane, I believe, still at Liverpool. Yasser Larouci as well, both training at the academy at the moment. But again, I would imagine both of those two probably will go out on a permanent transfer. Again, I think it's the right time for both of those players to move on. Yasser Larouci, we know, has sort of been interested in the likes of Leeds United and teams like that, but nobody has quite come in for him yet. But I'm sure both of those players, Harvey Kane and Yasser Larouci, will find, if not a permanent home, certainly a loan deal before the season begins, because, as I say, both training with the academy, it doesn't look like they've got a first-team future.
Yeah, no, Grant McCann, the Hull City manager, remember at the end of last season, actually, Harvey Kane picked up an injury and he said he would be a huge miss for them, but before that was intimating he'd be happy to take him back. Obviously, they've dropped into League One in the meantime, so you don't know if that maybe appeals to Harvey Kane, or obviously the situation whether Hull City have been able to finance anything for that. And on Larouci, I think one of the clubs linked with him has been Brentford as well, and their left-back, Rico Henry, has been linked with a move to the Premier League. So maybe if something happens there, we might see movement. But we'll have to wait and see how that all plays. So those are the players then who have moved on and moved out, or are waiting for moves maybe out of Liverpool. But with the academy and the way it works, Matt, obviously every year there needs to be a fresh batch, as it were, of young players who step up from the 16s into the under-18s, and I suppose formally that's their first sort of real marker they need to hit of whether they're given scholarship terms to be there for the next 2 years. And obviously a number have, and crucially there's one player who Liverpool fans might already know about, but not for maybe his footballing abilities.
Yeah, no, there's a few players who've obviously been made that step up from the under-16s to be first-year scholars. I think just before I list those players, I think the important thing is that their manager, of course, at under-16s level will be the same at under-18s as well. So that sort of links back to what we were saying before in terms of that progression. So, yeah, goalkeeper Harvey Davis, centre-back Lee Jonas, left-back Luke Chambers, midfielder Lucas Stevenson, who I think has played a couple of games or certainly been on the bench for the under-18s in the past. And then forwards, Harvey Blair and Oakley Cannonier as well. That is the name that a few Liverpool fans may well recognise. All of those players, 16. Oakley Cannonier, though, famous, of course, when he was 14, just about to turn 15. He was the ball boy that gave Trent Alexander-Arnold the ball for that corner against Barcelona. So, yeah, plenty of Liverpool pedigree in him at the very least already. Hopefully that doesn't put too much pressure on his shoulders, but it's going to be really, really interesting to see what all of those players can do this season. And, I'm sure in terms of the storyline, the narrative, if Oakley Cannonier scores from a corner early on, I will certainly be writing that line. But, yeah, Max Voltman as well, just to quickly mention him. He stepped up at the back end of last season. And again, he will be a first-year scholar heading into next year.
Yeah, that is a brilliant one on Oakley Canyon. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see, obviously, what happens with him. But it would be great if he does score from a corner, more for us, I suppose, to talk about than anything else. And I'm sure the clip would go viral on social media immediately. Anyway, once players obviously then into the 18s and they get their scholarships, they're free to sort of move amongst the age groups they are. Before that, as you said there with Max Voltman beforehand. But Leighton Stewart is a player I know you want to talk about a bit more in our one to watch feature that we'll round things off on. But he is one of the players as well who is already looking to sort of kick on in the academy.
Yeah, turned 18 this week. Fidel O'Rourke as well. He's not 19 until February. It's easy to forget, really, with how long he's been in and around the academy teams. The under-18s captain, Fidel. So hopefully, he will make that step up to the under-23s. I think both of those have got a pretty good chance of being under-23s regulars by the end of this season. I suppose the difficulty is that they both play in that number 9 position, and Paul Glatzel, of course, is still there as well. So plenty of competition. But yeah, Stewart with the under-18s for now, scored 4 in 3 in pre-season, so he's doing pretty well. Tom Hill, he was another one who I thought potentially could have stepped up to the under-23s, but he was a first-year scholar last year. Seems like he's going to be with the under-18s for now. And Musialowski and Frauendorf, as I mentioned before, they will be there as well. So yeah, plenty of talent. Tyler Morton's one that I've picked out as one of our one-to-watch features in the past. He is certainly one to watch, hence the title. But yeah, he is certainly a really good technically gifted player in midfield, and he is again still very young. He will sort of step up and almost be one of the more senior players this season, even though he's really still very, very young. So yeah, certainly plenty to watch out for with him. In terms of the under-23s, Adli Sharif and Paul Glatzel have both been involved pre-season. So obviously Sharif coming off the back of a fairly lengthy injury. He's one that I've picked out plenty of times again in the past. Maybe 12 months ago, he was one of the stars really of Liverpool's FA Youth Cup win. He was one that we were still talking about at that point as being able to take that next step. Last season would have been his first season in the under-23s. Obviously got that big injury and that wasn't able to be the case. Some other names, Jake Kane, Leighton Clarkson, Jack Bain, plenty of sort of familiar faces within that group, particularly Kane and Clarkson. Obviously, we saw them in the FA Cup against Shrewsbury. So again, 2 really, really exciting midfielders, and 2 midfielders that Barry Lewtas will know really, really well. So I'm sure they will be 2 out of his 3 midfielders for the majority of this season. Just quickly as well, James Norris, I think that's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought of him as being one who could step up to the 23s, but it looks like he might have done that. An England under-17 international, but plays at left back, so quite possibly with Yasser Larouci potentially moving on, Adam Lewis having moved out. Potentially it's just an opportunity for him, just in the right position at the right time, if you like. So be interesting to see how he gets on. And of course, Billy Koumetio as well alongside him in that defence potentially. Made a big impact, of course, for the first team, but it's a case now of, is he ready to step up and be in the under-23s on a regular basis? Will he stay with the 18s? I'm not too sure at this moment in time, but I'm sure that decision will already have been made. So yeah, plenty of new names. Obviously, we've talked through those first-year scholars and that sort of thing. And you'd imagine next season it's going to be pretty rare for the likes of Curtis Jones, Harvey Elliott, Neco Williams, for them to represent the under-23s. I don't think is going to happen too often. So that just frees up a little bit more space and allows that next batch, as you say, to come through.
Yeah, very excited, I'd say, to see what Jake Kane and Leighton Clarkson can do this year, as we said, with Barry Lewtas as their coach, and maybe, who knows, without the likes of Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott, if they're not playing too much 23s football, it might give those players that license to sort of aspire to be the Neco Williams and Curtis Jones through the academy and have that platform to really take their game to the next level. We saw how effectively Jones did do that last season. Let's round things off then. We've already alluded to who it's going to be, but our one-to-watch feature that we like to do at the end of these, the player this season, Matt, that you think might well lay claim to having a breakout season. We're not expecting him, of course, to go into Jurgen Klopp's first team, but a player who, within the academy structure, could well have a big season this year.
Yeah, I've tried to sort of look at it across the season as a whole, and I think Leighton Stewart is one that will start, as I said, in the under-18s, but you could imagine him very easily slotting into the under-23s whenever he's needed, or certainly on a more consistent basis in a few months' time. So scored 11 in 12 in the league last season, but he got injured in January. The league was then cut short, so it was only a fairly sort of short season, almost a half season. So to sort of score at that sort of rate was really impressive. 16 in all, 2 in 3 in the UEFA Youth League as well. So he's proven he can go away and do it against different sorts of sides. But yeah, he's such an interesting player. 56 times he scored the season before last for the under-16s. Clearly knows where the back of the net is, and he's got the impressive sort of record of having scored against Everton in every single youth level that he's played in so far. So all the way up.
That's why you picked him, isn't it? That's why.
All the way up to the under-18s, he seems to have found the back of the net against them. And fingers crossed he can do that for the under-23s at some point, because Everton's under-23s do tend to be quite good. So, yeah, he's one of those who's trained with the first team on plenty of occasions. Jurgen Klopp is very much aware of his abilities, his talents. 56 goals, let's say, for the under-16s, that pretty much put him on the map, and he hasn't really looked back from then. So still a lot to do, I think, in terms of bulking up and the gym and that sort of thing. But certainly that's something that will, I'm sure, be worked on over the course of the next few months. And I've not seen him since lockdown, but maybe that could have helped him out too in that regard. So yeah, I'm sure he is certainly one to watch this season. And I suppose it sort of depends on Paul Glatzel if he ends up going out on loan. A big thing then would be for Leighton Stewart to step up to the under-23s. So he's already played once or twice for the under-23s, but I suppose that's his big target. Came on and made his debut against Chelsea against them last season. If he can go and do that more regularly, who knows? The future is certainly bright for him.
No, it certainly is, and seems to be bright for a fair few of the crop of Liverpool youngsters. So we're back up and running then with the Academy show for the new season. Thanks to Matt for joining myself, Guy Clarke, for this edition of the Academy show here on the Blood Red channel. We will be back on a regular basis from here on out now through the course of the season as the 2020-21 season does get underway. But as I say, from myself, Guy Clarke, and Matt Addison alongside me, thanks for your time and your company here on the Academy show on the Blood Red channel. It's bye for now.